let's jump right into this explainer. To really grasp the sheer gravity of our source material today, we've got to set the stage in first-century Judea. Imagine living in a world under absolute Roman rule, a place literally defined by daily hardship, intense uncertainty, and a deeply rooted hope among the people for some kind of deliverance. I mean, it's the perfect historical backdrop for a story that would go on to fundamentally shape the modern world.
Right out of the gate, we have to ask this massive question. How could one man change human history? It's a huge paradox, you know? We're looking at a relatively short life, lived over 2,000 years ago, in a dusty corner of the Roman Empire. Yet somehow, this single life went on to influence billions of people across generations. So, who was Jesus, and why on earth has his story survived for millennia?
Let's start with Section 1, the birth and early years. The Gospel accounts are fascinating because they trace his origin not to some royal palace to Mary, a young woman from the tiny town of Nazareth. According to the historical text, she received this truly remarkable announcement that she was going to give birth to a son named Jesus.
Now, the early years for that young family were, well, they were surprisingly chaotic. Mary and Joseph traveled to Bethlehem, where Jesus was born in incredibly humble circumstances, greeted by local shepherds and visiting magi. But things didn't stay peaceful for long. King Herod, fearing a child associated with kingship, created a very real, life-threatening danger. This forced the family into a perilous escape all the way to Egypt before they could finally return and settle down to a quiet life back in Nazareth.
There's actually very little recorded about his childhood in that quiet town. But before the years of silence in Nazareth really set in, we get this brief, just astonishing account. At just 12 years old, Jesus is described at the temple in Jerusalem. And he's not just there. He's engaging in deep conversation with the religious teachers and completely amazing them with his understanding. After that, years would pass quietly. But eventually, that silence would absolutely shatter. Which brings us to Section 2, a ministry of compassion. Those quiet years definitively concluded at the Jordan River. His public life officially kicked off when he was baptized by John the Baptist, an event where the text actually described the heavens opening and the Spirit descending like a dove.
From that river, Jesus traveled all throughout Galilee and the surrounding regions, and he brought this wildly revolutionary message directly to ordinary people. He taught them to love God and their neighbor, to forgive others, to show mercy, to care for the poor, and to completely turn away from hatred and hypocrisy. He wasn't out there preaching about building earthly empires, right? He was talking about a radical, ground-up transformation of the human heart.
And he was an absolute master communicator. He frequently taught using these simple stories called parables. You've probably heard of the Good Samaritan or the prodigal son. By using these super relatable narratives, he allowed everyday folks like farmers and tradesmen to instantly grasp these incredibly profound, complex spiritual ideas.
The momentum of his ministry was just staggering. We're talking massive crowds gathering, and not just to hear him speak, but to see what he did. The accounts tell of him healing the blind and the sick, feeding a crowd of 5,000 with literally just 5 loaves and 2 fish, calming a raging storm on the Sea of Galilee, and even raising Lazarus from the dead. But here's the real takeaway. People ultimately stayed because of his deep, genuine compassion. He spoke with the rejected, he showed mercy to sinners, and he actively touched the lives of the forgotten.
Now, this level of compassion deeply, deeply challenged the religious and social norms of his time. Think about it. First-century expectations were largely built on power, judgment, and revenge. Jesus completely inverted all of that. He taught that true greatness was actually found in serving others, that forgiveness was way more powerful than revenge, and that love should extend, get this, even to your enemies.
To spread this message, you'd think he'd pick the religious elite, right?
Actually, no. He chose 12 completely ordinary men to follow him as his disciples. We're talking fishermen, a tax collector, heavily flawed individuals. The source accounts don't hide their raw humanity at all. They argued amongst themselves, they got scared, and they constantly struggled to understand the sheer magnitude of the teacher they were following.
Moving into Section 3, the gathering storm. As you can guess, this unprecedented ministry couldn't just continue on unchallenged. As Jesus traveled toward Jerusalem, the tension completely skyrocketed. His immense popularity, combined with teachings that totally exposed hypocrisy, deeply concerned the established religious leaders. So while crowds welcomed him to the city with praise, just beneath that celebration, a very real danger was brewing.
During the final meal he shared with his disciples, what we know as the Last Supper, he commanded them to serve and love one another. Yet at the exact same time, he spoke of his coming death. The shadow of betrayal hung heavy in that room, because one of his own, Judas Iscariot, had already agreed to hand him over to the authorities. Right after the meal, in the quiet of the Garden of Gethsemane, the text described Jesus praying in absolute agony. His disciples, they were exhausted, completely unaware of the gravity of the hour, and they basically just struggled to stay awake. It was right there that Judas arrived with an armed crowd. Jesus was arrested, his disciples scattered in pure fear, and the man who taught courage now faced his absolute most painful night.
What immediately followed was essentially a chaotic trial. He was passed through this gauntlet of authorities, fiercely questioned and hit with numerous accusations. Ultimately, he was handed over to the Roman authority, Pontius Pilate. Pilate questioned Jesus himself, but eventually succumbed to the pressure of the crowd and ordered his execution using a notoriously brutal Roman method.
That brings us to Section 4, the darkest night. We've arrived at the emotional and historical climax of the accounts here. Jesus was taken to Golgotha, where he was crucified alongside common criminals. For his followers, watching this devastated from a distance, the darkness and sheer grief surrounding this scene must have been absolutely overwhelming.
Yet, even in the face of agonizing death and deep darkness, the Gospel accounts record something truly mind-blowing. Looking right at the people responsible for his brutal execution, Jesus uttered a prayer of pure mercy. Father, forgive them. I mean, it was the ultimate, staggering culmination of absolutely everything he had taught about love and forgiveness. Following his death, a man named Joseph of Arimathea requested Jesus' body and placed him in a tomb, which was then heavily sealed shut. For his followers, who were mourning deeply, this really appeared to be the final tragic chapter. Their beloved teacher was gone, and it seemed like all their hopes had just died right there with him in the dark.
But, Section 5, the empty tomb. The story takes a turn that literally no one at the time anticipated. His followers definitely did not yet understand what was coming, but the entire foundation of Christianity would soon be built on this one bold belief that death was not actually the end of Jesus' story. According to the Gospel accounts, on the third day, women arrived at the tomb early in the morning, only to find the heavy stone completely rolled away. The tomb was empty. Shortly after, those same frightened, scattered disciples began proclaiming with absolute conviction that Jesus had appeared to them, that he had actually risen from the dead. This single, massive belief changed their lives instantly and permanently. Which leads us to our final part, Section 6, a legacy that endures. What began with a small, terrified group of followers in Judea rapidly spread like wildfire across the entire Roman world, eventually crossing oceans and continents to completely shape global history. To put that into perspective today, That legacy is just staggering. We're talking billions. Billions of people across the globe who identify as Christians. His teachings on forgiveness, compassion, sacrifice, and love have fundamentally influenced human communities, cultures, art, literature, and music for over 2 millennia.
But, we really need to bring this back from grand statistics to the personal level. Because during his life, Jesus didn't spend his time hanging out in palaces. He walked among ordinary people. He spent his time with the poor, the sick, the rejected, and the grieving. His enduring legacy isn't about earthly power. It's about a message that spoke directly to everyday people who were hurting and hoping for something greater.
So, this is the historical and theological narrative we've explored in our explainer today. A life born in humility, a ministry defined by unprecedented love and mercy, a brutal crucifixion and burial, and that foundational Christian belief that he rose again. It is a story not of revenge, but of ultimate sacrifice and serving the forgotten.
Which brings us right back to where we started, leaving us all with this enduring question: who was Jesus? It's a question people are still asking more than 2,000 years later. And for billions of people around the world, the answer remains exactly the same. He was the Christ, the Savior. Regardless of where you stand on the history or the theology, one thing is absolutely undeniable. His story is still being told. Thank you for joining me for this explainer, and I'll leave you to ponder that question until next time.